Let's have a look at that story again. Broke on the programme yesterday, the announcement that Labour are going to have a small-scale probe rather than a national inquiry into grooming gangs. This was announced by Yvette Cooper, the Home Secretary, yesterday. Let's have a listen to what she said.
I have asked Baroness Louise Casey to oversee a rapid audit of the current scale and nature of gang-based exploitation across the country and to make recommendations on the further work that is needed. Effective local inquiries can delve into far more local detail and deliver more locally relevant answers and change than a lengthy nationwide inquiry can provide. So Tom Crowther, KC, chair of the Telford inquiry, has agreed to work with the government to develop a new framework for victim-centred, locally led inquiries where they are needed, and as a first step, to work with Oldham Council and up to 4 other pilot areas. That will also include support for local authorities who want to explore other ways to support victims, including local panels or drawing on the experience of the Independent Inquiry Truth Project.
Has that ticked the box they were trying to tick, Henry?
I don't think so. The government is basically backpedaling.
Yeah.
The deeply unfortunate thing about the initial refusal to hold a national inquiry, and I'm normally sceptical of inquiries, right? They take forever. We're very, very bad at them in this country. Normally, it's actually remarkable to see a government resisting having one, because normally calling for an inquiry is you'll break glass in case of emergency, punted off 10 years in the future response. But the way that Sir Keir Starmer sort of implied that people who were calling for an inquiry were abetting the far right, it actually echoed the language of the local authority officers and others who suppressed this crisis in the first place. You read through the testimony and it's all, oh well, we don't want to lift this rock and we don't want to risk disturbing community relations. And to hear a Labour government then basically repeating that line about an inquiry was deeply unfortunate. These inquiries, they're better than nothing. They may well be able to identify more granular detail about a particular problem. But the whole point of a national inquiry is that this was not a problem in one town, right, or one local authority. So a national inquiry, the point of it is to spot the patterns. Could we do it in a more expedited way? Sure. Nick Timothy, Conservative MP, has called for a National Crime Agency inquiry specifically into the sort of horrifying allegations that there were police officers collaborating with the perpetrators of these crimes, and that's another thing that the government could do more quickly. Sure. I think the final thing, though, is Dame Louise Casey. Is she the only person whom governments can call on to do?
She does all the inquiries now, Henry. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, but she's also
they're all called the Casey inquiry.
Yeah, and she's responsible for the government's social care review, for which we're going to have to wait until 2028.
You can't make it up. Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, I would imagine.
If she has time to do this, she could do that more quickly.
Yeah, if you are charged with something, so delicate and important as this, I don't think you want someone who also is doing another inquiry, or any other job for that matter. I mean, you want their focus to be solely on this, you might have thought.
I mean, I would have thought so. And even if she's like, okay, that's fine, I just won't work on social care until I've dealt with this. In which case, why was the initial deadline for social care 2028? She's clearly got time on her hands. So I think the whole thing is just another dispiriting look at what the limited pool of levers that central government thinks that it has to pull. And I suspect, honestly, that the government may end up yet just being bounced into having an inquiry, because you've got the victims out talking to the press saying that this isn't good enough. And if the government can't find a response to shut that criticism down, it's going to be very, very hard for them to endure.
Indeed. Worth having a look at the story of Israel and Gaza. The office of Benjamin Netanyahu says a deal to release the hostages has been agreed. Who is responsible for this? Is it Netanyahu? Is it somebody from Hamas? Is it Donald Trump? Or is it Joe Biden? Well, let's find out what the current, he's got about 3 days left, President of the United States had to say on this.
After 8 months of non-stop negotiation, by my administration, a ceasefire and a hostage deal has been reached by Israel and Hamas, the elements of which I laid out in great detail in May of this year. This plan was developed and negotiated by my team and will be largely implemented by the incoming administration.
There it is, largely implemented by the incoming administration. He's essentially taking the credit. We can argue that one forever, I suppose, Henry. I don't think we can remove Trump from the equation, given the rather robust comments he made about unleashing hell on the area if they didn't sort it out. I think that stuck a firework up the trouser leg of Netanyahu as much as it did Hamas, frankly, but that's a whole other debate. Could we be reassured now that something is going to happen over the coming days?
It does look like it. I think you're right about Trump. Trump, for all that we think of him as an agent of chaos, his foreign policy record was actually pretty good in his first term. Most obviously, the Abraham Accords, which the Biden administration renamed, which was an amazing development in Israel's relations with various Arab countries. I think something is going to happen. It looks like it is now. There was a last-minute wobble overnight with the Israeli government saying that Hamas had reneged from some loose end or other. We weren't told what it was, but it has apparently been resolved. The big question is, how long does it last? Because this is only a 6-week ceasefire. The right-wing parties in Netanyahu's coalition have said that they are not going to collapse it now, as long as the war resumes in 6 weeks' time. So it's a very rare government, no matter how much foreign pressure they're under, that will deliberately sign a treaty that causes that government to collapse, especially when you're Netanyahu and being in government is what's keeping you out of the courts. Indeed. So I think that's a real challenge.
And a final one here. 1 in 3 Gen Z workers have called in sick over stress recently, much more than their older colleagues from other age groups. We've got a third of Gen Zers took time off. Young workers 18 to 24 age group, this is more affected by mental health stress, with just over half comfortable discussing it with managers. Seems like a lot of people to be. Seems like either it's a terrible indictment of the world we're in at the moment that so many young people are stressed, or they're just making this old shizzle up, thinking I don't feel great today, so therefore that must be stress, and stress equates to not going to work.
Yeah, it's always difficult because whenever you talk about these big trends, you want to be clear that you don't want to pass judgment on any individual person's circumstances. But I think it is fairly clear that in many cases what we've got is we simply have a system that incentivizes this kind of thing, right? I mean, it might be that people have always been stressed. That stress has always been a fact of life. Yeah. But I don't know if a previous generation would have thought that stress was a reason, at least a good reason, or a reason to call into work. Call off sick very often. And you can see this in other areas as well. The huge explosion in disability claimants, for example, over the last 5 years. Now, of course, don't want to cast doubt on any individual person's disability claim, but it also appears that Britain has, in the last 5 or 6 years, created more disabled people than World War II did, right? It's not as if we've got a vast demobilized army of people who've had limbs blown off, and yet there are the numbers in the growth of people citing special needs in schools, right? Last year or the year before, for the first time, 50% of a school year, an entire school intake in Wales, was classified as special educational needs. Now, is that real? I mean, I don't think the Welsh Assembly has quietly put lead back in the petrol. So whenever this happens, you simply have to think we have created a system where whatever the underlying reality, and of course there are people with serious mental health conditions, and stress is never pleasant, where people are either incentivized to claim and to identify themselves as having a condition, whereas previously they might have been having a bad day, and where we have normalized the response, which is things like calling off sick. And however understandable it is in some circumstances, one of the great ironies of this kind of culture is that actually, if you look at the advice that therapists will give to individuals, it's very rarely to take your time off, right? Yeah, an actual therapist will tell you to confront your problems, get out of bed. There's no change unless you do things. Doing things is what makes you feel better. Things get less scary the more you do it. If you don't like making phone calls, go and make 10 phone calls. You'll be fine making phone calls at the end of that those 10 calls. And yet, that advice is never what we do officially because it seems cruel, and I think that is deeply counterproductive. There it is.